I was going back to school. I had a new child and I just relocated. It wasn't easy. And I think people have a misconception of like, oh, ultrasound, all you're gonna do is just look at babies and scan at babies all day, right? People think pregnant moms. And that's actually not the case. You'd be surprised. You can scan from your head down to your toe.
Welcome to the Insider Career Conversations. My name is Sylvia Juarez Consulting. As a higher ed advocate, it has become clear to me that not everyone is interested in a traditional degree path. As I started to talk to colleagues, like my co-host this season, Brenda Castellanos-Nash, I learned there were careers that don't need an extended education path. And equally important, these jobs were extremely valuable components within their sectors. That said, I'm excited to introduce Insider Career Conversations. Now on this show, we'll explore some of the lesser-known careers that are concealed within different fields. Guests will join us to discuss their journey into their professional world and advise us on what additional components it takes to be successful in their field. Listeners will discover important aspects of each career, things like what education is needed, job descriptions and potential salary, and what a day in the life of that professional looks like. This season, our conversation will center around jobs within the allied health sphere. I'm excited to introduce my friend and career awareness comadre, Brenda Castellanos-Nash.
Hi, happy to be here. So can you believe it's been over like 20 years since we met? I can't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I definitely remember meeting you.
I totally agree with you. I was thinking about that this morning. When I was thinking about it, I was thinking about when we met and we immediately connected. I remember sitting in the back of that room, you and I just making notes about what we were going to do in the admissions office and how we were going to be creative and how we touched base with the first generation population we worked with. And we wanted to make sure that everyone had options like the ones that we didn't have when we were coming up. So you are definitely somebody that I am excited about working with. And I look forward to the season of Allied Health.
Same. I'm happy to circle back with you on this project. When you approached me about it, I was like, wow, this is awesome to be able to work with you again. And I don't know, for those of you who don't know, I used to work with you, Sylvia, as an admissions counselor for the Office of Admissions and Outreach at the University of California, Berkeley.
So Brenda, we share being mothers, wives. I'm excited about the conversation of allied health. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what allied health is?
Sure. Allied health is a field in medicine that not many people know about. You still do rigorous training. You do a formal program that's accredited. However, you don't have that long training compared to a physician or like a nurse. It's still training and it's still very challenging. However, it's not as lengthy as a traditional field for a doctor or a nurse. They normally tend to be 2-year programs, and they could be private programs or they can be public programs. However, my personal experience is that most hospitals, including magnet hospitals, tend to hire students that have graduated from an accredited allied health program versus a private program. Nothing against private institutions, just a different type of accreditation that happens. And I found that for the most part, when you've done an accredited program, and I say accredited, I mean through the state of California, a lot of hospitals look for that type of experience.
Right. And I appreciate you earmarking the conversation about accredited, because most students that are thinking about short-term career paths are looking at everything. And some of those institutions may not necessarily be licensed through the state of California or through the particular agency that they should be connected to. So I'm happy that you bring that up, because we do want to make sure that our listeners have options, but that their options fall within the guidelines that some employers may be looking for, or that they themselves would be able to move their credits or their work from that institution to another. As I come across a lot of students that are trying to make those types of moves for whatever reason, and then they discover that their units or their credits can't be moved, or they won't be considered by another institution. So that accreditation is very important as we have the conversations with allied health professionals throughout the season. So tell us a little bit about your bachelor's and a little bit about your professional commitments right now.
Yes, straight out of high school, I went to a community college, and I did a outreach program there called Puente, and there they expose us to like different paths you can take, and into college, but never was allied health mentioned, which is not a negative toward them. I think they just it was like a pilot program at the time when I was in it, so they were just getting their feet wet. However, they did give me a solid structure of like, okay, in order to transfer, this is what you need to do. So I transferred to Berkeley, did my undergrad there in American Studies. I wanted to be a teacher, but at the time, they didn't have education as a major for an undergrad. So I did American Studies, and which is kind of like they told me that I can do interdisciplinary within American Studies and focus on education. However, that wasn't the case. I got my degree and realized I wasn't satisfied, and I knew I wanted to continue to be in higher education. I just didn't know in what capacity. And so when I saw the opportunity for outreach and admissions at UC Berkeley, they saw my experience during my interview. I talked about my background. I talked about my personal experience, which I guess I can mention that now briefly. But when I was in high school, and I'm totally dating myself right now, but when I was in high school, they were paper applications because internet wasn't an option at the time. And so I went to my counselor's office, and here I am, like first gen, had no guidance from my mom and my dad. They didn't know what to do. A single mom, by the way, my dad wasn't in the picture. And I sat down in her office and I said, hey, well, I want to go to college. At the time, this is up in the Bay Area. So I was like in the Richmond area, and Richmond, California, by the way. And she said, well, honey, I am so sorry, but we need to save these applications for students who have a chance of getting in. And she didn't give me a paper application to college. So that was my experience, which is why I went to community college. But I don't regret what happened to me because it made me who I am and got me to my path to where I am today. So with that being said, when I saw the position at UC Berkeley for outreach and admissions, I talked about my story in my interview, and I said, I don't want what happened to me to happen to any students in the future. And so that's why I made it my goal to make sure that I gave the information to students, especially, which is so important, people don't realize, but middle school is so important to make sure you're on track to take the right courses in order to be eligible in high school, to be eligible to apply for the college or university. So anyways, that was my personal experience. So that's how I got into outreach and admissions at UC Berkeley. And so I did my undergrad in American Studies, got my degree, worked for Berkeley, which is where I met you. And then that's why we hit it off so well, because we knew we had the same goals and the same passions for underrepresented students.
As long as we've known each other, I don't think I've ever heard that story before. And it makes my blood boil because
I
had the same situation in Indio, California. My college counselor told me the same thing. I'm a little older than you. And she had to sign off on my application, again, paper. She had to sign off on my application. And when she saw that I was applying to Berkeley, she told me that I shouldn't. It was going to be a waste of money, and that I needed to take it off the list. And the only reason I didn't was because my dad, who, for those of you that have come up with very rigid male-dominated household, my father never wrote any checks. My mom was responsible for the household. So this was the first and only check I remember ever him actually signing and giving to me and saying, good luck, I'm handing this to you. And it had the amount of 3 schools. So I wasn't going to tell my dad that I didn't apply to one and have him write another check. So I wasn't going to go back there. So I just did it. I went against her wishes, not because I thought different than she or I was outraged. I wasn't going to go back to my dad and tell him that I needed something different. For me, again, circumstances, much like you, took me in the direction of actually getting it done. But really, I could have had a different path had I listened to that counselor. And that's one of the reasons why I started my business, because I feel like a lot of counselors just don't know. I don't want to make it a malicious, that they're maliciously doing these things. I generally don't think they know. So podcasts like this, I hope, give them an opportunity to see a variety of other fields that they can encourage their students to think about. And an expert like you is priceless, as in my opinion, because of what you're providing them in terms of background not only that, but also tying it to how the career can unfold. And so, if I remember correctly, you went back to the community college to get your continued education, correct?
Yes. So fast forward to being a sonographer, ultrasound technologist. Um, when I graduated from Berkeley and I was working in admissions, I wanted to go back to school, and the whole .com thing at the time was happening, right? So I was like, oh my God, I need to hop on this bandwagon. I need to like educate myself more. And I didn't take coding. I didn't take any programming. I didn't do any of that. I actually got an opportunity to work for web development in Emeryville, California. It was called bustamove.com, which I don't think they exist anymore, but they were great. And it was a good experience for me. And that's where I learned like my web development skills and my Photoshop. And it was like literally training on the job because I don't think they had very many formalized programs at the time. I knew that I liked technology and I liked my education. So I wanted to somehow incorporate those two things. Then I met my husband now. We've been married for almost 20 years now. And at the time, he was in the technology field. And again, the whole .com bubble burst. And so I knew that for job stability, job security, I didn't want to get a job where it was going to be dependent on the economy. So I realized it was like an epiphany, like, okay, what two fields that are constant will not be affected regardless of what's happening in the economy? And I thought, well, it's kind of a dark thought, but people are always dying. So either the funeral business or people are always getting sick, the healthcare field. So I thought, well, let me incorporate technology, continue with my background, or somehow use technology and then healthcare. That's how I found the ultrasound program, or otherwise known as diagnostic medical sonography program, at the local community college in Costa Mesa, California, Orange Coast College. So I did my research. I knew that if I wanted to not guarantee myself a job, but at least increase my chances of obtaining a job when I finished the program, that I had to do an accredited program. So I made sure that this program I chose was licensed by the state of California, which it was. I went to a website called the Commission on Accreditation of Allied Health Education Programs, otherwise known as CAHEP. And so I pulled up a list of their accredited programs in the area that I was living in. And that's how I found the program that I found, which is Orange Coast College. And at the time, it was the only program that you can get an AS degree in, not a certificate, but an associate's in science. And I knew I wanted a degree, not a certificate. Nothing against certificates, but again, I got my associate's in science in diagnostic medical sonography, so that I wanted to have on paper a degree in addition to my bachelor's degree. So when I applied, that would make me stand out in comparison to other people who graduated from the programs.
So in terms of years, Brenda, for someone who's in that particular field to get the degree that you mentioned, the associates, that's a 2-year program in what we're encouraging to be an accredited institution. But now you can get a bachelor's in that, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Now you can actually get a bachelor's. I believe Kaiser's one of the first that's offering a bachelor's in diagnostic. And I'm saying the first in the West Coast and the first in Northern California. But yes, at the time that was not an option. But yes, that is correct. You can obtain a bachelor's in diagnostic medical sonography now.
And I also saw that for those that are already in the medical field, it takes about a year because you're kind of in that realm, correct?
Yes, some programs have a waiting list, and I know the program that I particularly attended now has a 5-year waiting list. Some programs don't have a waiting list, but they have to keep it a very small size. And I say like maybe at the most 20 students. I can only speak again to the program that I attended, because you have to remember a lot of these programs have to place you at a clinical site at a local hospital. So they can only take one, maximum 2 students to be in there with a sonographer or with a physician practicing on patients. So that's why they keep the program classes so low. And that's why these programs tend to be competitive. Like I mentioned, a 5-year wait, because they can only take a certain amount of students a certain amount of time, again, to place those students at a clinical sites. So that's kind of like medical school, right? You can only get into medical school for a certain amount because it's based on how many sites you can do your residencies at.
Gotcha. And I think it's also important to talk a little bit about the background. We want to know that when we get into the program, we are prepared with what the subject matter is going to be. So I'm thinking anatomy, physiology, mathematics, physical science. Do you need to have a large depth in that? Or is it okay if you did so in high school or in college? Like, how do you feel about the subject matter?
Yes, thank you. So when I realized that there was a prereqs to get into the program, my background was I had no science background whatsoever. So I thought, oh my gosh, I was always like ill blood or surgery, or it was like had an aversion to even seeing like a huge open gash. So I was like, oh, I don't know if I can handle doing biology or physiology. But with that being said, because the program that I got on the waiting list, and at the time the waiting list I think was 2 or 3 years. And I forgot to mention this: if you have a 4-year degree, you don't have to take all the prereqs as everybody else that's coming in who have no kind of degree. They have to do with general ed, the basics, the English, the math, the science. So I had no background in any of the sciences, so I had to do prereqs. So while I was on the waiting list, that's when I knocked out all the prereqs. So I took anatomy, physiology. I even took chemistry, even though that wasn't a part of the prereqs. But I took it because I wanted a solid foundation in all the sciences. So that was super helpful. And I think if you have that background in high school, even just exposure to it, you don't have to get an A in it, but as long as you understand the material, I think that will be very beneficial so that when you do get into a program like diagnostic medical sonography, it'll be helpful and you'll have an advantage to other students who don't have that kind of background.
Well, I think what I admired most about you while you were doing that sonography program, I really admired the fact that you were a new mom again. You and your husband had just relocated.
Yes.
You had an older child. It wasn't like you were looking for things to fill up your time. And I think sometimes when we're looking at making a
Oh, no.
change or making a movement when it comes to education, we often think we have to find the perfect time. And what I always admired from you was the fact that you were going into a field that was completely against what your bachelor's was. You were tackling it head on, and you had all these responsibilities. And now I still see you doing the same juggle, professionally with what you're doing. So as a mom, I'm always, just super in awe of you and how you maintain your mom status and very engaged and involved mom while still passionate about the career that you've opened for yourself.
Oh, well, thank you. That's super sweet of you. Yeah, I think one thing I do want to also, I mean, you touched on I forgot to mention those points, right? Yeah, I was going back to school. I had a new child and I just relocated. It wasn't easy. And I think people have a misconception of like, oh, ultrasound, all you're going to do is just look at babies and scan at babies all day, right? People think pregnant moms. And that's actually not the case. You'd be surprised. You can scan from your head down to your toe, and people don't realize that. Another reason why I pursued ultrasound is because I didn't want to just scan babies. I didn't want to deal with, and again, I'm a mom, so I can say this myself, and so are you, but I didn't want to deal with hormonal moms who were hella moody. Not all are moody, but super hormonal, hella moody. And I was like, no, I want to scan everything else but pregnant moms, because there's vascular, there's something that's called deep vein thrombosis or DVT, which it's like a clot basically that can travel to your lungs or to your brain. And these are things that you can scan for on ultrasound, which people don't realize. I mean, you hear gallstones, kidney stones, there's so many pathologies that you can find on ultrasound. That's what I wanted to do. But with that being said, when I scanned my first baby, honestly, I was so mesmerized. Like, I was in love. So even though I didn't want to scan pregnant moms, I actually found that I enjoyed scanning moms the best.
So Brenda, I think that's also very important because I think, like you mentioned earlier, you weren't down for the blood, guts, and gore. I definitely wasn't either. That's why I never thought about the medical track, but you've introduced me to some fascinating people this season. So I'm already thinking I could have done that. But what do you think the aspect of the testing component, like when you had a test to get your license, or if you had a test to get your license, was that something that, I don't know, you felt some sort of way about it? Or was it something that you were just going to jump into because you had the background?
Testing. So yes, there was a physics test, a board certified physics test, which by the way, that was very challenging. State licensing is very difficult. I am board certified, so I did have to study for the test, and it was, I believe, a 3 hour test. So, in addition to taking a physics test, you have to take a test in an area of specialty. So, when I say specialty, either OB, obstetrics and gynecology, otherwise known as OB-GYN, or abdomen, general abdomen. There's also vascular, there's also breast, there's also neonatal, there's different subspecialties, but everyone has to take one major test to get licensed in physics, board certification from the state in physics. So testing was hard, but again, with that being said, remember I did it while juggling moving. I had a newborn baby and I had 2 other children. So it was challenging, but not to say it's not impossible.
So tell us a little bit about the continued education that you have to take.
Okay, so it's called continuing medical education units. And so you have to, every 3 years, I have to take a certain amount of units to maintain my license. And if you don't maintain it, then your license expires. And you can usually attend major conferences and you basically attend the workshops. Sometimes you take a test after the workshops. And when I say test, it's not like a major test. It's just like a quick little summary of what you learned for that day. And then you obtain your units or your continuing medical education units. And then you're able to renew your license.
So I know you took this particular degree in a different direction. And I know that your particular professional approach to this degree is a little unique in my perspective, but can you tell us what the day-to-day activities or responsibilities are? What are the most scans that are out there? I guess probably OBGYN was the one that we most know about, but maybe it's not the most common.
Right. So a day in the life of a traditional ultrasound sonographer would be you can do outpatient, meaning where you can go to a hospital or a clinic and you have scheduled patients, between the hours of 9 and 5. And depending on the type of exam, it could be an hour exam, it could be a 30-minute exam, it could be an hour and a half. And those vary based on the type of exam. So you have what's called an abdomen exam where you would, look at the liver, you look at the kidneys, you look at the pancreas. And the pancreas, these are all organs in the stomach area. You would do vascular, which is you would, scan the legs to see if there are any clots in the legs. You can do neck, which is you have an organ called your thyroid in the front of your neck, the bottom. So that's another organ. You'd be surprised. You can even scan the eye, the eyeball with your eyeball closed. You can look for retinal detachments or macular degeneration. These are all things that are associated with your eye. So again, you'd have patients scheduled from like 9 to 5, usually on the hour with an hour lunch break. That's outpatient. With that being said, you also have, you can be a sonographer on call. You can work at night. You can have scans where you go to the emergency department and you're just on the dot, you're just doing emergencies, whatever comes in. One of the most common ones that I've seen is the gallbladder because a lot of people have gallstones. So that's the most common ultrasound scan that I've come across, aside from the OB-GYN ones, the pregnant moms. Yeah, it really varies. There's also specialty clinics, like fertility clinics, where you use ultrasound as well, where a lot of, women who are using IVF, for example, they need to have their ovary scanned, to see how many follicles they've got. So it can be that highly specialized.
So a traditional sonographer, their salary runs about $70,000 a year, right?
Yes, that's roughly, I would say starting would be more like 65 with no experience. And then you can go from minimum to, I have some of my colleagues that I graduated with are making over 100. So you can take it wherever you want to take it. It depends on, again, your experience and how many hours you want to work.
Is there a California specific or state specific variations?
Yes, it depends on where you live. So I believe Northern California pays more than Southern California. I would say I believe the hourly rate when I graduated starting was maybe 25. And I think now, and I have colleagues, I can't speak for myself because I don't make that much, but I have colleagues who work at private hospitals, and I'll say a big private like HMO hospital. I won't give any names, but they're making like $75 to $80 an hour. So it really varies. Again, you can make a really decent wage as a recent graduate, and then you can make as much as you want or as little as you want.
Well, it seems like there's some economic mobility there, that there's an opportunity to be able to grow within your salary range. I know we joke about the fact that you always clarify, at least in a room I've been into a couple times, you clarify the difference between a stenographer and a sonographer. Do you want to share a little bit about what you've had to make those clarifications? That's been funny to me, by the way.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I actually forgot. Yeah, sometimes when I say sonographer, people think, so what, have you heard some really cool court cases? And I'm like, no, that's a stenographer, not a sonographer. I do need to clarify when people ask me that, yeah, I am a sonographer, otherwise known as an ultrasound technologist, not a technician, but a technologist. Technician is the person who fixes the ultrasound machines. The technologist is the actual person, who operates the machine and makes the machine sing, is what I like to say. So yeah, that's another thing. I think a lot of people confuse technician with technologist. So
I think the last thing I'd like to give you the opportunity to share, Brenda, is tell me a little bit about what you find promising about your career or the field that you're referring to. I mean, sonography, what's the up and coming stuff?
There's a lot of change. Technology is constantly changing. There's something that's called Moore's Law, I believe, which every 18 months, like a microchip, a new processing chip comes out. And I think the same can be applied to technology and medicine. There's so much happening, so many changes happening. Nowadays, you have ultrasound machines that can plug into your phones directly. Granted, they're not available to everybody because you have to have like a license to purchase one.
I think I find that fascinating, aside from the fact that, and sorry, I just got super excited. I just find that fascinating that, first of all, it's portable. And second of all, I just assumed that medical students already knew this type of medicine or healthcare education.
I think students are aware of it, but I do have to mention that we are the first in the West Coast, UCI School of Medicine. I don't want to sound like a big billboard for UCI School of Medicine, but it's just because that's where I work and that's my employer. And we are the first in the West Coast that have actually fully integrated, or we were, I don't know if it's changed since, but fully integrated the point of care ultrasound curriculum in our curriculum for medical students. And we are the first that have given ultrasound units to all of our med students.
Thank you so much, Brenda. One, for letting us hear about your sonography career and how you're currently impacting the future generation of medical students. And two, for just helping me out with this crazy conversation about just these fields that are kind of these hidden gems, and finding all these people for the season to participate and give us some wisdom. I'm so looking forward to having these conversations in the next few episodes about allied health and how the impact of it is in our community just overall, especially with healthcare right now and the sensitivity behind everything that's going on, and how, everybody does need to make sure that they're taking care of themselves.
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I definitely look forward to continue to have these conversations and highlighting fields in allied health that don't get, the kudos that they deserve. So thank you for taking me on this journey with you. And I'm looking forward to it.
I know. And especially starting off our first episode with putting your business out there. Girl, you are one of a kind. And to our listeners, please stay tuned for more inside career conversations that showcase career paths within the allied health sector. We appreciate you listening and look forward to next time.